All right, so the plan today is to look at the reproductive technologies that we talked about in the last lecture, and look at how the church addresses or looks at these different things. But again, I want to remind you that you have an article due on May 7th, and you will have the test on laws and ethics on Friday, May 8th. So just be aware of that. So here we are. We'll go ahead and get started. We'll follow through the same way or schedule that we had with the reproductive technologies, and then we'll take a look at how the church responds to those. All right. So the first one, as was what we talked about the other day, was artificial insemination. I remember artificial insemination is mechanically introducing sperm into the uterus to try to get a woman pregnant. And as I mentioned when we're talking about artificial insemination and in vitro fertilization, is that in the eyes of the church, they go against natural law. So obviously the church is going to be opposed to those. And other than the fact that it goes against natural law, the church states that what artificial insemination does is that it separates reproduction from the sex act, so that a woman can get pregnant without engaging in sexual intercourse. And so what this does is that it eliminates the link between sexual intimacy and procreation. So when we talk about sexual intercourse has two purposes, and it's try to not to be clinical about it, but it's the one part of sexual intercourse is to be unitive. All right, it's the bonding of the couple. Right, it joins the couple together. Basically, that was how you. Well, I mean, it's the whole idea of the wedding night, right? That you have totally given yourself to another person, and this is the seal of this covenant. Marriage is a covenant, and sexual intercourse kind of seals the covenant between a man and a woman. And the thing is too that when a woman engages in sexual intercourse, she produces what is called oxytocin. This is a hormone. This is called superglue of the heart. It's the bonding hormone. She produces it 2 times. One is when she's breastfeeding. The other is when she's engaging in sexual intercourse. And so this is that bonding that takes place. Now, the bonding does take place for males, but they're not sure if there's a hormone similar to oxytocin that is produced. If there is, they haven't really, brought to the forefront. So you have the first part, right, that it's unitive. The second part is that it's procreative. That the purpose of sexual intercourse is to create life, and that this is one of the elements within marriage, is that when you go to get married, one of the things that the priest will say to you when you go through pre-Cana is that are you willing to accept children lovingly and willingly from God, and that if you don't, the church can refuse you your the marriage. And the other thing about it too, regardless of what the situation might be, I'm using family as an example of this. Regardless of what the situation might be today, that a child is a sign, a living, breathing sign of the love that a couple had for one another. So that's why sexual intercourse is so important. Not just in this case, but in general. It's not supposed to be the stimulation of nerve endings in the backseat of somebody's car. It's not supposed to be something that is a part of homecoming or the prom. I mean, this is not something that you just hand out at like you would hand out Christmas presents or Christmas candy at Christmas time. This is something that's supposed to be valued. This is you. So that's why the church is very vocal and strong in their stance concerning sexual intercourse. All right, so in the eyes of the church, that the alternative is adoption. Right, there's 2.5 million requests for adoption that go unanswered every year. So, there's, we talked about that with abortion, that there's, with the number of abortions that are performed, that if people would, not have abortion, maybe put the baby up for adoption, that these people that are unable to have children would be able to adopt. In vitro fertilization. Again, if the church is opposed to artificial insemination, you can be sure that they're going to be opposed to in vitro fertilization. And the reason for this is that it replaces both sexual intercourse and the beginning of life from the womb. So, the parents don't even have to be in the room when the egg is fertilized, because it's done in a lab, it's done in a petri dish, and then the embryo are then inserted into the woman's uterus. So, again, the church is going to be opposed to it for that reason. And there are some other issues that are involved here. As we mentioned with regard to in vitro fertilization, is that they have to hyperstimulate the ovaries, so the woman is producing many eggs, and that say that, like we had talked about the Octomom or Kate Gosselin, that had multiple pregnancies or multiple births, that they, ethically, that probably is not the best thing to do. It's very difficult for the mother, physically, emotionally, even economically. But the big question is, what do you do with the embryo that aren't implanted? And again, in the eyes of the church, is that once the egg is fertilized, it's considered human life. And if the couple gets pregnant and they have twins or even triplets, and they have embryos that are still viable, they're not going to want to, they may not want to keep paying to keep them in what's called cryopreservation, which means that they freeze the eggs. And so if they would destroy them, then they would be, in the eyes of the church, that would be considered abortion. And, it is human life. There's also, so you have the moral or ethical aspect from the church's perspective. Then you also have the legal aspect. What happens if because infertility can be very stressful on a couple. And say that they do get pregnant, they have the twins, triplets, or maybe they just have one child, but then maybe they end up getting a divorce. And what do you do with the embryo that have been put in cryopreservation? Who gets custody of those? And what happens, say that they get the divorce and the woman gets custody of the embryo, and 2, 3, 4 years down the road, she decides that she wants to try to get pregnant again. And then you have, again, the question, and this is a rhetorical question. It's one that has to play out in the court system. That can be different from state to state, court to court. But does that mean that her first husband, she may not be married the second time, but her first husband is still ethically, morally, and financially responsible for these embryo, and then again eventually these children? So these are questions that come up, and because of our science of today, these are issues that we are dealing with in the courts. I mean, Sofia Vergara, who was an actress, you may know her, but she's in Modern Family, and she and her partner have had issues with custody of embryos. So I'll post that. It's a little article about that. I'll post that later on so that you can see what I'm talking about with regard to this. So there are a lot of issues that are involved here. Again, you have the moral and the ethical issues that are involved in this, not only just from the fact that, again, the church is opposed to it, but you have the idea of the number of embryo that are implanted. What do you do with the embryo that aren't used? So, like I said, this is why the church is more or less saying that, in this case, you should adopt, right? Put in for adoption. All right, so we talked about birth control, and The church is going to be opposed to birth control. That's one of the things about the Affordable Care Act that the church has been opposed to since it came out. And that's one of the things, too, that you find with the companies such as the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. Archdiocese is not a company, but it is a business in a legal sense, and that they provide health care for their employees. But because the birth control goes against the teachings of the church, they've come into some issues with the Affordable Care Act. As a matter of fact, the Little Sisters of the Poor, right here in Cincinnati, went all the way to the United States Supreme Court on the issue of the fact that they were being required to provide contraceptive care for the nuns. I mean, as we all know, the nuns take a vow of chastity, so that would not be something that they would need, but they would have to pay for it. So it's an added expense, and it also goes against the teachings of the church. What in the eyes of the church violates separation of church and state. So these are still legal issues that are going on right now. When we talk about birth control, there are different types. So if you have chemical birth control, which would be drugs, birth control pills. You have also birth control patches. There are spermicides that are used, and so these are things that can be done. And, excuse me. Regardless of what type is used, the church obviously is going to be opposed to them. There's also surgical types of birth control. Right, a woman can have a hysterectomy. A woman can have her fallopian tubes tied so that the egg does not go down the fallopian tubes to the uterus so that she can get pregnant. Men can also go through a vasectomy and would not be able to. The sperm would not be able to be ejaculated. So these are things that can be done. Now, when we talk about hysterectomy here, we're talking about a non-therapeutic hysterectomy. Non-therapeutic means that it is not done for medical reasons. Right? So, if you have some type of surgery done, surgery is usually either therapeutic or non-therapeutic. Right? Non-therapeutic means that it is not done for a medical reason. I mean, there's no medical reason why you should have this done. It's kind of like a facelift or breast augmentation. In many cases, this is non-therapeutic. There's no medical reason why this should be done. The hysterectomy can be the same way. The only reason why the hysterectomy is being performed is so that the woman cannot get pregnant. Therapeutic, right, when you're talking about therapeutic, is that there is the definite medical reason for this to take place. Right, so a woman could have to have a hysterectomy when we're talking about therapeutic hysterectomy because that she's ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, endometriosis, whatever might be the case. That would be therapeutic. Like if you have, when you have a tooth that has to be removed because it's infected, or you've got wisdom teeth, that would be therapeutic. When we talk about plastic surgery, but if you're involved in an accident, and you've got cuts on your face, you have to have plastic surgery. That would be considered therapeutic. If you just don't want to look old anymore, you want to have your eyebrows lifted, or the crow's feet eliminated. That's non-therapeutic. Just so you know the difference between therapeutic and non-therapeutic. Right? Non-therapeutic is that there is no real medical reason to have this procedure done. Therapeutic is that you're trying to heal something. You're trying to heal whatever disorder might exist. There are also, when we talk about birth control, we're talking about implants. Right, an IUD is what is known as an intrauterine device. It is put in the opening of the cervix to keep the sperm from entering into the uterus. The sponge is the same thing. Now, the difference between the IUD and the sponge is that the IUD is put in by a physician, and that that it stays in. The sponge is implanted again at the opening of the cervix, put in at the opening of the cervix. This would have to be done before engaging in sexual intercourse. The sponge has spermicide on it. It also is a barrier method. It prevents the sperm from entering into the uterus. The Norplant implants. This is one that was very controversial. These were little rods. They were about maybe half an inch long, and they were inserted surgically in the back of a woman's arm. And that what this was a slow release medicine. This medicine would be released into the woman's body over time. There were some problems with that, is because that some of these were being, you might get 2 or 3 of them being released at the same time, and this was a huge dose of medicine, chemicals that were being introduced into the woman's body, and there were some complications with regard to that. There were some issues with the IUDs as well, because they were, when they were women who were athletic, that the in their athletic adventures, the IUD could shift and move and everything else. Women were getting infections. There were scar tissue was being created and everything else. So there were issues with this. As a matter of fact, there's issues with all of this when you start to put chemicals into your body for whatever reason it might be, again to go against the natural process. Now, the church's position on birth control. This is one of the things that really need to understand about sexual intercourse, and why it has in the church. It is such an important aspect of why these things that we're talking about can go against the teachings of the church. But back in 1968, Pope Paul VI issued a papal encyclical. It's called Humanae Vitae, which means of human life. And this is just one of the major statements addressing human sexuality within the document. And it's kind of the basis of the church's position, especially on birth control, is that each and every act of sexual intercourse is to be open to the transmission of human life. So there's nothing that we should do to prevent a woman from getting pregnant. And that's, again, barrier methods, which could be, an IUD or the sponge or even a condom, surgical procedures. These are things that are not to be done. Again, the idea is, it's where you look at the value of sexual intercourse, right? That it is it's unitive and it is procreative. It is the ultimate expression of love between a husband and wife, and that it is supposed to be done within a committed, monogamous, married relationship. And if that's the case, then you can be open to the transmission of human life. So that's the church's position with regard to that. All right. So beyond just what was said with Humanae Vitae, but the thing about it is that here we have something specifically that separates the unitive and the procreative aspects of marriage. Right, so the unitive is the bonding part of it. Birth control doesn't impact the bonding part of it, but obviously it does impact the procreative aspect of it. All right, natural family planning. Natural family planning is a natural, obviously that's what's called natural, means by which you really what it does, the way the church presents it, is that it tells you this is the best time to engage in sexual intercourse. And I'm sure through your biology classes and through health, you know that you study the woman's menstrual cycle, and that you know that there's a certain period of time when a woman is fertile, and so that it would be the best time. And as the church, that's the best time to engage in sexual intercourse. It is also the time is to not engage in sexual intercourse. So women know what their cycles are. They have a pretty good idea as to when their period should start. So they have a pretty good idea as to when they're ovulating, so that the eggs are present, that the woman could become pregnant. So natural family planning is a means by which you measure a woman's body temperature. Right now, you use what's called a basal thermometer. Basal thermometer measures very minute changes in a woman's body temperature. You have to take her body temperature every day for like 3 months, and that you're able to track at what time she ovulates, and that her body temperature would rise very minute amounts. It's not like It's not like you've got a fever. It's not like you go from 98.6 to 101.2. This would be, you might be at 98.6, and then you go to 98.7, 98.9, 98.8, and then it may drop back down to normal after 5 to 7 days. So, this is what natural family planning is. Again, so the way that they present this is that they're telling you that this is the best time during that anywhere from, could be 5 to 14 days, that that a woman could be pregnant, 5 to 7, 5 to 14, somewhere in that range, so that this would be the best time to have intercourse to be able to get pregnant. But it's also saying that this is the time to refrain from sex so that you don't get pregnant. All right, abortion is also a form of birth control, because it's but again, we know that the church is opposed to that. We don't need to go into detail, because we have already covered this when we're talking about the commandments in the fifth commandment. Okay, so as we know, it's deliberate, and that the church's position is that human life begins at conception and should be protected till its natural conclusion. The one thing too that we sometimes don't always realize with the church's teachings on human life is that once this life has been conceived, regardless of what the situation is, that the protection of this human life takes precedent over everything. All right, so that's what that statement there about, that it outweighs all other values and concerns involved, regardless of what the situation is. Right? The church does not see any justification as to terminating that life, and that the life should be protected, and that everything should be done to bring this life into the world. And so it's a tough situation, but the church has to be black and white with this. The church can't say, it can't be done here, but it can be done over here, because once you start making exceptions, then you open up a whole can of worms, and it becomes an issue. There's always people that are trying to get around it, and I know this is hard, but it's once the pregnancy occurred, regardless of how it came about, it's rape, incest, the physical or psychological health of the mother, because once you start again making exceptions, then you're going to have people that are going to can come up with different scenarios, and it makes it very difficult. That's one of the struggles that you're going to find with our legislative bodies that are trying to come up with these laws about abortion, and changing the abortion laws that exist in the decision by the Supreme Court of the United States. And that's one of the things too with regard to rape. So say that the church says that, well, okay, abortions cannot be performed except in cases of rape. But what happens, say, if you have a young couple that are not married, and they're involved in a sexual relationship? She gets pregnant. She doesn't want to carry the child, or they've broken up, and that she wants to have the abortion. And the only way that she can have the abortion is if she's been raped. But then she accuses her ex-boyfriend or her current boyfriend of rape, so that she can get the abortion. And then he then is considered a rapist. Then he would be considered a sexual offender, and then would have to, then you've got a whole lot of issues that come up with regard to that. Even though originally it was consensual, but because of the stipulations that you make, this is the only way that the abortion can be performed. So this becomes the issue. This is why the church has to be black and white. This is why the church says that once the egg is fertilized, that value, it outweighs everything. There's no way that you can justify terminating that life. Now, when we talk about the physical aspect of it, is that that everything should be done to protect the lives of both individuals. And so, and that's tough. That's tough. So it's just these are issues that are bigger and take longer than the amount of time that we have here to deal with it. But and I know it's hard at this case to kind of discuss these, especially when we don't have the time to do that. And again, the physical and the health of the mother, that's kind of what we were talking about with the physical aspect of it. Okay, so there's certain things, and we're coming down to the end here. There's certain things beyond the medical technologies that we need to discuss. As we know that we're talking about that human life deserves respect regardless of what the situation is, and that's with technology and testing and things like that. And we've already talked about when does life end, and again, it's the quality of life, it is the respect of life, it's the protection of womb, tomb, and that how are people being treated, the elderly in nursing homes, the people that are in hospice. The idea is that it's always the respect for life. Just because somebody is old doesn't mean that they're disposable. So this is why there should be this care and treatment of all lives, and all lives should be respected. And Cardinal Bernardine, who was the Archbishop of Cincinnati before he became the Archbishop of Chicago, and eventually Archbishop of Chicago, and then became a cardinal, was one who had cancer, and he wrote a book detailing the suffering that he experienced. And he really focused on this idea here that just because he was suffering doesn't mean that his life is any any less valuable than somebody else's, and that suffering does not make the life any less important, any less valuable. All right, so we already touched on euthanasia, and so we can just kind of, I don't want to say go through this quickly or gloss over it, but people use the term euthanasia to again say that they're mercy killing, that they're just trying to eliminate the person's suffering, and they talk about dying with dignity. They're using language that tries to justify what they are doing. And so when we're talking about euthanasia, we talk about something being active or direct. That means that you're taking steps to bring this about. There's two different types. You have voluntary, which is with consent, or involuntary, without consent. So voluntary means that you've told people, hey, you know what, I don't want to be in this situation. Pull the plug, remove the respirator, or whatever. When it's involuntary, is that the person doesn't make those decisions or hasn't made those decisions, and you make that decision based upon maybe your relationship with that person about that. The indirect means that you don't do something. Obviously, you don't provide them with medical care. One example: this isn't euthanasia, but it's somebody that has a DNR. Now, the church, as you know, is not opposed to a DNR, which is do not resuscitate, but that would be passive. Right? You don't give that person CPR because they're at the final stages of cancer or whatever it might be. But you don't perform the CPR because you don't want them to have to suffer anymore. That's what's allowing the disease or the injury or whatever it is to complete its natural course. That's different than this. So and here's one of the things we really need to talk about. We'll talk about ordinary means of life support and extraordinary means of life support. And ordinary means of life support is the fact that there are either surgical implements that are used. Like we hear a lot about respirators now. This generally a respirator is considered an ordinary means of life support because there is a reasonable expectation that that person is going to come off the respirators. Obviously, with the COVID-19, people that are put on respirators, it's one of those issues that hopefully they're going to be coming off those respirators. And in many cases, they have not. But generally speaking, when somebody's put on a respirator, there is the reasonable expectation. That's the key phrase here with regard to life support, is that there's a reasonable expectation that this person is going to be able to come off of this form of life support. Right? Extraordinary means of life support means that there really is no reasonable expectation that this person is going to survive. This could be, gunshot wound. It could be a stroke. It could be, a whole number of different things. And that say the EMTs get to the scene, and there's no brain activity. There's no heartbeat. They hook the person up to a breathing tube. They intubate the person. They do CPR. They're able to get the heart started, but it's the respirator that's keeping that person alive. That's the only thing. There's no brain activity. This is what I'm talking about with the fact that there is no reasonable expectation that this person is going to survive, and so you can remove what is considered extraordinary means of life support. There is a difference between removing extraordinary means of life support and euthanasia. Right? Removing extraordinary means of life support means that you're going to allow the event, again, gunshot wound, car accident, stroke, whatever it might be, to complete its natural course. Right? The only thing is keeping that person alive are all the machines that they're hooked up to. Right? They're not breathing on their own. There's no brain activity. And so, you can remove that type of life support. An example of this, we had a woman that worked at LaSalle whose son was involved in an accident, and that there was no brain activity, and he was being kept alive with a respirator. And so there was no brain activity, and the family decided they would remove the life support and allow the results of the accident to complete their natural course. There is a difference there between somebody that is maybe in a persistent vegetative state where you just remove the life support because they're going to be on life support. We had talked about Karen Ann Quinlan, Nancy Cruzan's, that those are individuals who are that they were going to remove the life support to eliminate their lives, really, what they said was suffering. Terri Schiavo, and I think we talked about Terri Schiavo as well. She was one who was refused nutrition, right, water and food, and she died as a result of starvation and dehydration. She did not die as a result of the traumatic brain event that she had. So these are things that are very difficult. And again, medical ethics within theology could be a year-long course because of the many elements and aspects of it. All right, assisted suicide. We're gonna stop here, and we will pick up assisted suicide on the next lesson, because we're really kind of gone kind of a long way on this one, and I don't want to lose you here. So we'll pick up with assisted suicide. It'll be a short bit for the next time, and then we can be prepared for the test, which will be on Friday. So you guys have a good day. Stay safe.